All right. Well, let's get Mr. Stanton Friedman on the show here. Okay. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Wow, he's coming up with my contacts.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Stanton Friedman. How are you? You're live on the Eddie Jason Chris Show on Idobi Radio.
Oh, well, I'm fine.
Oh, well, welcome to the show.
When are we talking?
we're gonna talk right now. So, Mr. Stanton Friedman is a nuclear physicist lecturer, and he received his BSc and MSc degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 1956. And he was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, and more. And he's worked in such highly advanced, classified, and eventually canceled programs such as nuclear aircraft, fusion and fusion rockets, and did I mess that up? Fission.
Yeah, just keep going.
Sorry, fission and fusion rockets, and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. And you've just done so much, and now you are
a preeminent ufologist.
Yeah, you became interested in UFOs in 1958, and you've lectured about this at more than 600 colleges, and you've done it all. We're glad to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's an absolute honor to have you on our show, Mr. Friedman.
Well, I'm glad to be there. I've also written 6 books.
You have. I mean,
you're a busy guy.
Your accolades are just...
Co-authored 5 of them, or 4 of them. Solely wrote 2.
Wow.
Before we go any further, why don't you tell us about your most recent book?
Well, it's got a different sort of title. It's not just a book about UFO sightings. It's Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers by myself and Kathleen Marden. She's Betty Hill's niece and an expert on UFO abductions, an accomplished speaker and writer on her own. The book demonstrates that some of the people who have attacked UFOs and ufology were guilty of massive misrepresentation and frustration to those of us who read it by getting their facts wrong. Clearly they had an agenda, which is rather surprising. 3 of the people we talk about were Dr. Edward U. Condon, a world-class physicist. I'm a physicist. He was president of the American Physical Society. He directed the University of Colorado's study of UFOs, which came out way back in 1969. And a top scientist, no question, member of the National Academy of Sciences. And yet, if you look at some of the stupid things he said, like there's no chance of any intelligent life from off the Earth visiting the planet for 10,000 years, I wouldn't take odds on any or bets on anybody knowing what's going to happen 100 years from now, no less 10,000.
Yeah, how could you say that?
I'm barely sure what's going to happen minute for minute.
Right.
Yeah, and another one of the people was Dr. Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor of astronomy, a total debunker, we thought, in the 50s and 60s. His first book, he wrote 3 of them, was translated into Russian in the early 50s. And he tried to debunk all UFO sightings, and I discovered, to my total surprise, and everybody else's surprise, that he worked for the National Security Agency for 30 years. He said that in a letter to JFK, John F. Kennedy himself, after he'd been elected president. They knew each other because Kennedy was on the board of overseers at Harvard, and his area of interest was astronomy. He and Menzel even had breakfast together on occasion. On a first-name basis they were. And Menzel, tells Kennedy that there's one area where I may be able to be of considerable help to you. That's with regard to the National Security Agency. When we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. Nobody knew that he had a security clearance, and certainly not with the NSA. It turned out he was a world-class cryptologist as well. And there's even an article in the Scientific Journal about his contributions to technology. And he did work for a lot of, for the CIA, FBI, et cetera. And nobody knew this. A good example of somebody who could keep secret his goings on. I get people telling me nobody can keep secrets anymore, Stan, with YouTube and so forth. It's simply not true. I had a clearance for 14 years, and I'll guarantee you secrets can be kept.
And have you kept most of these secrets?
Well, these are two guys. The third guy may be of more interest to you guys, a guy named Philip J. Class, who was a senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, and sort of took Menzel's place. He said there were no sightings without prosaic explanations, and he attacked people viciously. I wrote the FBI that Dr. J. Allen Hynek was not a scientist, and all kinds of bad things he said about him. They're in his FBI file, if you look. Classes FBI file.
Well, can we roll this way back for a second?
Yeah.
For some context, you mentioned Betty Hill.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too.
Who is Betty Hill?
No, it's Betty and Barney Hill.
I'm glad you asked that question. The most famous UFO abduction is the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill in 1961 in New Hampshire. Betty was a social worker. Barney worked for the post office and was on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission. And they were a mixed-race couple, which was rather unusual back in 1961 when this experience took place. Driving along, they'd gone over to Montreal and Toronto and come back home. It was kind of a second honeymoon. And on the way home, they spotted a light in the sky, and it came closer. It sort of followed them, and then it came very close. And Barney looked at it. There was a row of windows, and there were beings inside. And then there's a gap in their memory. They got home 2 hours later than they should have. And under hypnosis by Dr. Benjamin Simon, a world-class psychiatrist who dealt with military people who'd had difficulties after what's the fancy term we use? They were shell-shock war veterans, but we have a better PTSD.
Yeah.
He was a world-class expert on that. And the Hills experience, there was missing time, and he didn't know anything about UFOs, but he sure knew a lot about how to help people who'd had a traumatic experience, which they certainly had. And it turned out they'd been taken on board that craft and examined in separate rooms. It was a catch-and-release program, if you will. Skin samples, hair samples, that sort of thing. And they were put back out and didn't remember what happened. This came out under separate hypnosis sessions. Dr. Simon was an expert at doing that sort of thing. Didn't know anything about UFOs. So the Hill case was the first abduction case that got any publicity, if you will. There was a book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. There was a big article in Look magazine. I don't even know if Look's still around anymore, but it was a major publication.
Can I jump in for a second? I hope you don't mind if I play devil's advocate, but I imagine a skeptic could take the line that you mentioned this was a mixed-race couple in the early 60s, and that Barney, I think you said, was a civil rights advocate or consultant to the governor at the time. Could this have been a case of racial targeting misremembered?
We don't think so. Kathleen Martin, who was the co-author of the book, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, and also co-author of Science Was Wrong with Me, and co-author of this new book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. Kathy heard about the story the day after it happened, and she has set up an archive of Betty's papers at the University of New Hampshire, and we've looked. There's an awful lot of material about the case, and a lot of easy explanations have had to be brushed aside as we looked at the data. And yes, I did meet both of them and was very favorably impressed by them. They didn't want to go public, but somebody had broke a confidence and told a reporter about a story that he had heard, and the reporter broke it in the Boston Traveler newspaper, and they were much surprised. They were expecting to lose their jobs. But it got a lot of attention, and then John Fuller came along, a fine journalist, who wrote his book, The Interrupted Journey, and that was a bestseller in many countries back in the mid-'60s. There was a television reconstruction of the story in 1975, starring James Earl Jones, incidentally, playing Barney. And so, I'm not saying it was 100% accurate. I was a consultant on that program. But our book didn't come out until, 9 years ago, I think it was now. And the Hill case was a landmark, because before that, nobody had talked about UFO abductions. There were cases before that, we didn't know about them. I mean, can you imagine if you're going to get laughed at for reporting a UFO, and how much worse the situation would be if you report, oh, well, they took me on board and examined me, catch and release program. That was not going to get you any friends. Now, times have changed, and, I've given over 700 lectures. I've only had 11 critics, if you will, at my
11.
lectures. Who knows what they said outside, but anyway.
It is a
people are ready and willing to accept facts and data, which is where I come into the picture as a nuclear physicist. I talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies, and I ask my audiences after each one, explaining what's in it, how many have read this, and I'm lucky if it's 2% have read any of them.
Well, that's...
So,
Samantha had a question, and then I wanted to.
Well, I just want to also say, the Betty and Barney Hill thing, for anybody out there that watched season 2 of American Horror Story, the whole alien abduction plotline and the interracial marriage was loosely based off the Betty and Barney Hill thing. So that still is seeping into American pop culture, even in recent years. But aside from because I actually had on the list to ask about Betty and Barney Hill and then the alien abductions. Before we go to another subject, I want to ask you, what do you think the overall reasoning behind the alien abductions are? And do you think people are taken to outer space, or do you think they're kept here on Earth during the abductions?
Well, certainly the Hills were taken on board a craft. They didn't go anywhere. It was on the ground out in the boondocks in New Hampshire. I can't say nobody's been taken into outer space. I don't know. But the objective, it seems to be, grab a sample of the local population and study them. They take samples of hair and skin and so forth.
Do they take?
And it's generational. That is, multi-generations have been abducted in the same family.
Well, can I ask real quick? As part of the sampling process, do you think that they're, taking specimen from individuals to, crossbreed with their species?
Dr. David Jacobs, whose PhD thesis related to UFOs, a historical one, thinks that they're here on a breeding program. I don't know. I think there may be several reasons for coming here. The Earth is an interesting society in the sense that it's a threat to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you say, how could we be a threat? Well,
nuclear war.
We've exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons. Once you learn about the secret of fusion, which is what drives all the stars in the universe, you can use it for propulsion systems. I worked on a study of that in 1962. I was a young man then.
Well, that's a perfect opening for the question I wanted to ask. As a physicist, what do you think, what theories can you put forward about the means by which extraterrestrial intelligences are able to traverse the light years of expanse between us and even the nearest stars?
Well, you have to look carefully at the relevant data. For example, there are loads of stars out there, judging by the Kepler satellite, which looks for planets around stars. There is an average of between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. Within 100 light years of here, which is just down the street, there are 10,000 stars and therefore probably 10,000 planets. I'm not saying they're all inhabited. That isn't the question. The question is, are any? We used to think we had the only solar system around. Wow, we're on top of the heap. Doesn't look like that. In our own galaxy, there ought to be billions of planets. And, what is the purpose? Well, I mentioned fusion. We have demonstrated that we have a substantial disregard for the welfare of our own society. Look, the military budget this year is $1 trillion. In World War II, we killed 50 million of our own kind. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We're not nice guys. If you were an alien, would you want us out there? My goodness,
oh, no.
If I were, I wouldn't. There were many reasons, for example, for explorers to come to the New World after Columbus. Some wanted to steal gold, some wanted to convert the heathen, some were gathering vegetables like tomatoes and potatoes, There are a lot of different reasons. And but let me get back to your basic question. Let's put some facts on the table. One, at 1G acceleration, the force of gravity right here where we are, to which we are all subjected most of the time, at 1G it takes less than a year to get very close to the speed of light. I've had professors guess 10,000 years, or 1,000 years, or 100 years. It's less than 1 year.
1 year?
Wow.
At 1G to get to see the speed of light. That's the nomenclature standard used. Many people, like I say, think it's going to take a hell of a long time. Well, that's not true. A fusion system, which uses isotopes of hydrogen and helium, which just happen to be the two lightest and most abundant elements in the universe, a fusion reaction would exhaust particles having 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. And if you think that sounds ridiculous, let me take you back through a little history. A big bomb in 1944 in the middle of the war was a 10-ton blockbuster. Took a big B-29 to carry it, and it would release the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. Wow! The first fission device, an atomic bomb, if you will, in 1945, released the energy of 16,000 tons of dynamite, not 10. Now, the first fusion device in 1952, long time ago, released the energy of 10 million tons of dynamite, one stinking weapon. And the Russians set one off a few years after that released the energy of 57 million tons of dynamite, one bomb. So from an alien viewpoint, these guys can join the club if they want. That is scary. In other words, it's a myth to say, oh, you can't get here from there. That would be like saying that because it took Magellan 3 years, well, his ship, 3 years to go around the planet back in 1522, that's about how long it takes to go around the planet. Well, the space station does it in 95 minutes.
And they've probably figured out how to access wormholes, right?
Well, I'm not looking at wormholes. That's theory. I'm a practical nuclear physicist. I worked on fission nuclear rockets at less than 7 feet in diameter. The biggest one operated at a power level of 4,000 megawatts. That's twice Hoover Dam.
Wow. Well, go ahead, Samantha.
Now, while we're on the subject of, military stuff and engineering stuff, has the U.S. government, in your opinion, found alien craft to reverse engineer? Is that where we get a lot of our technology?
I don't know. I have no good reason to think we have.
Okay.
The key here is that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. We haven't had sophisticated technology for that long. First long-distance radio signal received in 1901. Planet's been around 4 billion years. The universe, at least 13 billion years. So I doubt very much if we're the most advanced civilization around. So, we don't know what kind of techniques aliens would use. That the government, that would be one of the reasons for secrecy. We know there were crashes at Roswell, at Aztec, at the plains of San Augustine, and Kecksburg. Certainly, one of the goals would be to find out how the darn things work. Well, what were they made out of? But, if you gave the smartest person on the planet in 1934 my cheap digital wristwatch here, now he'd know it was a wristwatch, it tells time, and he'd know it's got a battery. Could he have analyzed the chip that's in there? Not a chance. Could he have duplicated it? No way. It cost Intel $1 billion to build a factory to build microchips, if you will. So we got a lot to learn, and certainly I don't think you can expect. It would be like taking a native from the Pacific on board a 787 and say, can you and your friends build me one of these next week, please?
Now, you mentioned
very
Kecksburg.
Likely.
Do you believe that the Kecksburg incident, because there's different theories on that was a UFO. I've also heard things that people believe that the craft that landed in Kecksburg is actually Die Glocke, or otherwise known as the Nazi Bell, which was the Nazi wonder weapon. Which version of it are you inclined to believe?
Well, I've spent a lot of time with Stan Gordon, who was the chief investigator on that case. He's still around in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And no, I believe it was an alien craft. The description, the behavior, the fact that the government covered up very strenuously, not allowing people to get near what they recovered and so forth. No, and just another crash flying saucer. What can I say? I don't have a piece of it. Of course not.
Now, can you tell us, since we're running a little short on...
There were a lot of these crash saucers, so, it's not the only one. Roswell was the first one, and that certainly told the government that, hey, there are alien visitors here. There were bodies recovered. There was a craft that they couldn't really analyze with the then available technology. That's why they set up Operation Majestic 12, MJ-12, if you want to sound informal about it. Mm-hmm. President Truman set that up in late 1947, named the people who were on the group, and they haven't really told us anything about it at all since.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your personal security clearance within the government? What can you tell us about that?
I had a Q clearance for 14 years. The government grants the clearance, but I work for companies, and this gave me access to secret restricted data. Nuclear related.
Okay.
Now
they
remember,
pretty much have to vet
get
you.
access to classified data, you need not only a clearance, but you have to have a need to know. So I couldn't even get access to Navy radiation shielding data. I was working on nuclear aircraft for GE in 1958, and people raise an eyebrow, nuclear airplanes, what are you talking about? Yeah, the program was pretty good size. In 1958, the General Electric had a contract with the Atomic Energy Commission and the Air Force. We spent $100 million that year, employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. This wasn't 6 professors and 12 grad students. It's a big program.
Well, now, when you have this type of government clearance, I would imagine that, you're, without naming any names, when you're with coworkers socializing, things may be said in passing, or things may be said that that shouldn't be said. Did you ever gain any knowledge that way? Happy hour after work.
No. And
too many cocktails.
I've got people who tell me, the members of MJ-12 would have told their wives what they were doing. Nonsense. Mm-mm. I never told my wife anything classified. It would be violating the law. It could cost me my job.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't do us any good. I mean, what's the point of it? You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. That's one of the bases of security clearances and secure activities. It's not something you take casually.
No,
if you left a classified document out on your desk in a classified area with guards at the door, and they check every night.
Well, somebody should tell Hillary Clinton.
If you left one, you had to get called and come in and inventory all your documents. You don't do that more than once without being very careful.
Right. Well, go ahead, Samantha.
You've been very outspoken against the SETI Institute. Why do you feel that, why are you adverse to their study?
Well, I don't care if anybody studies anything, but to claim that this is the way to find extraterrestrial intelligence, I mean, that's what SETI is supposed to stand for, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and totally ignore all the UFO data, is pretty silly. They assume that there are aliens, intelligent beings out there who, for some crazy reason, are sending signals using technology appropriate to us.
Right.
With not a bit of evidence that that's the case. But you totally ignore the UFO evidence where we have thousands of physical trace cases, loads of radar visual sightings, all kinds of documents indicating a cosmic Watergate. Is pretty silly.
You don't think that a extraterrestrial intelligence would have found a use for radio wave technology on any?
Well, they probably did, 1,000 years ago. But why would they send us signals if they've never come here and there's no possibility, which is what SETI assumes? They're not going to come here. They're going to send signals, and we're going to find those signals, and it'll be a great moment for mankind.
It does seem
Couldn't
like a
we
waste of time.
detect background radio wave information, sort of their radio garbage?
We certainly study radio waves because they tell us a lot about what's going on in the universe. It's a message of what goes on in stars. It's useful information, but in terms of if you want to find out about extraterrestrial intelligence, look at the UFO data, the physical trace cases, the radar visual sightings, etc.
Well, the other issue with that too. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Samantha.
I was going to say the other issue with that too is even if we were to catch a signal that came from outer space, it could be thousands of years old because once a radio signal is transmitted, like even like our FM, AM radio station stuff, the waves just bounce on and on and on and on and on and on for the rest of eternity, which is why there's been cases where people have turned on their TV back when we had the analog sets and caught like a TV program that had aired like 20 years prior. There's weird interferences where things can bounce back. So it doesn't even mean that it's a current radio signal, even if we were to pick something up.
Yeah, we could be getting alien reruns for crying out loud. Nobody
exactly.
But you, so tell me a little bit about, since you are a fixture in the ufology community, is there any rumbling right now within the community as far as, what we...
Disclosure.
Like disclosure, what's on the horizon? When are the aliens, just going to go on the NBC Nightly News and sit down with Lester Holt?
Excuse me, Anderson
I
Cooper
don't know
isn't
any aliens, and I don't know how to talk to any aliens. So I have no, and I certainly don't know what the government is planning on doing. I have seen no signs that the aliens are planning to land in the middle of a World Series game or a soccer match or the Super Bowl or anything like that. That would be disclosure, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm not part of the disclosure movement. I do talk about we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate.
Yeah.
But there is a national security aspect to this. How do the darn things work? If we've learned something by studying the wreckage at from these various crash sites, and by monitoring measurements, not only radar measurements of the maneuverability, if you will, of flying saucers that our planes are chasing, but electromagnetic signals from the craft, how the color varies, how long it takes them to make a right-angle turn, all this kind of stuff. All that kind of data, we're not going to put on the table. Do the Russians put out what they have learned, or the Chinese? No. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. And certainly the first country to duplicate the flight behavior of flying saucers is going to rule the roost. Because they can outmaneuver anything we've got, that's for sure.
Well, what's preventing, I guess this is more of a speculative question, but what's preventing the aliens from revealing themselves? I mean, it seems like
I didn't say anything was. I don't know.
Okay, well...
They do their thing. Now, it may be that there's an agreement between us and them. I don't know about
We don't know.
That.
That's speculative. We won't speculate on that then, because we don't know. But I just find it a little bit odd that... it hasn't been. If there's something is going on, if these UFOs really are extraterrestrial, there has to be some sort of a governmental treaty between our species and theirs, right? You would assume.
How do you figure?
Why? I think they do their thing, and well, let me tell you a little story about what happened near Cuba. I got this from somebody who worked for the NSA. He heard my lecture. He interviewed me for a radio program he had, and then he tells me he's working for the NSA, and they were at, I think it's Boca Chica or Bolsa Chica, I don't know which, the nearest base to Cuba. And it's dull duty. You're listening to the other guy's radio communications. And you got to be trilingual, Russian, Spanish, and English. And this event happens. They pick up the the Cubans talking about a UFO heading southwest in general direction of Cuba at about Mach 1. And they scrambled Cuban jets, MiG-21s, to go up after it. And they tell them whatever way people do, get the heck out of our airspace. Standard practice, and people come close. You want to let them know you better not go any further. Anyway, the UFOs ignore them. So what should we do? They ask the ground, and the guy I'm talking to has been listening in on this, and they say, shoot it down. So there were two planes, two MiG-21s. The first plane radios that he's got a radar lock on, his missile is armed, and then there's screeching over the airwaves from the second pilot who said the first plane just disintegrated. Well, you can determine when the other guy's got you a radar lock on you and when his missile is locked on as well. So it looked like self-defense is all I can say, but somebody was paying attention. And so they're sending a message, leave us alone, I guess.
So they don't like us. They don't want to talk to us.
Well, I don't know. There are good stories about President Eisenhower when he was supposedly playing golf in Georgia. The presidential airplane flew him to New Mexico, Holloman Air Force Base, and parked at one end of the runway, and there was a UFO at the other end, and there was a meeting. Now, I've talked to somebody who's talked to aircrew members. He's a sharp guy named Art Campbell. And I tend to believe the story. Of all the presidents, the one best equipped to deal with highly classified matters in sensible ways was Ike. I mean, look at the role he had in Europe, during the war and stuff. So maybe that happened.
No, this is all very
I don't know, but they're not telling me. I don't have a clearance or a need to know for that.
Well, they should give you that. I'll clear you right now on the show. Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Everybody.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Yes, thank you very much. StantonFriedman.com, and you can get linked up to all of his books and DVDs and everything that he has done. We'll link up to that as well in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Have a great evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
That was interesting. The guy is
kind of awesome.
He's a wealth of knowledge.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
It's just like so much to get to. Just
we could have done the whole
topic.
show on that.
Yeah,
I know.
we should have him back sometime and just have him on for like the whole thing. That was like
He had me at aliens.
UFO
yeah, me
special.
too.
Maybe next time we have or you book such a cool guest that has such a rich wealth of knowledge, we can just block out.
Maybe we should do like a Sunday morning special.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Samantha.
Yeah, no.
Brunch and UFOs.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like, regarding, I personally don't think
Brunchology.
disclosure from the government is going to ever happen. Because if you go back to the 90s and listen to, like, old UFO stuff back then, everybody's like, oh, disclosure's going to happen this year. Bill Clinton's going to do it. And here we're, like, 4 presidents later, and there's not been disclosure. And
Well, if
I don't
Hillary
think
would
there's
have
going to
won,
be.
she said she was going to disclose it all.
Hillary did?
Yeah, she said that.
I think that was just a bullshit tactic. She was trying really hard.
Fake news.
That was not fake. It was straight out of the horse's mouth.
Why are you calling her
Yeah,
a
but
horse?
I don't think she actually would have done it.
Maybe she meant she was going to flash people when she said full disclosure.
Maybe, I don't know.
Hey!
Maybe when she meant full disclosure, she meant she was just going to let us all read her emails on WikiLeaks. I don't know.
Hey-o.
Whoa.
There we go.
Ooh, zinger. No.
That's a zinger. All right, well, thank you. We'll end on that high note. I don't think we can top that one.
Okay.
Samantha Scarlette, go check
See you
her
guys
out.
next week.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Always a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye. All right. She's bringing some interesting guests to the show. Less work for me as far as booking.